Hello and welcome to Cosmic Dream Sanctuary. This is the Regression Hypnosis on Finding Missing Time Practice and Study Group. So how this works is at 5 p.m. Mountain Standard Time, I live stream and broadcast to Zoom and YouTube a lecture and guided meditation on the topic, and then around 6 or 6:30 we will have a sharing circle and discussion on Zoom. So to find the Zoom URL, please go to cosmicdreamsanctuary.org/groups. So welcome to Cosmic Dream Sanctuary. The message here is that you are God dreaming you. Cosmic Dream Sanctuary is an ecumenical, interfaith, and open community of meditation, contemplation, and fellowship. We use meditation, reading, contemplation, and fellowship to develop ourselves so that we can embody greater peace, love, and unity consciousness here and now on earth for the benefit of all beings. We acknowledge the reality of the community of non-physical, celestial, angelic, extraterrestrial, elemental, and spirit beings as the many dream characters in the divine mind, which is your deepest and highest self. We are all one. So this group is offered in the tradition of mystic Christianity, Mahayana Buddhism, dream studies, CE5, quantum healing, and Western liberal arts. It is ministered by me, Daniel Rekshan. I hold a bachelor's degree in the Western liberal arts tradition, a master's degree in East-West psychology, a certificate in hypnotherapy in depth hypnosis, a certificate in the beyond quantum healing modality, and I'm ordained as a minister in the Universal Life Church. So the terms of this study are important to understand. So this course is explorative, it's not definitive. This course is focused on psycho-spiritual and imaginal level. Any hypnosis experience here is offered as training in self-hypnosis. This work is not therapy, treatment, or an intervention for physical or mental health. And all experiences in hypnosis or guided meditation arise from the imaginal and psycho-spiritual aspects of mind, and therefore must be interpreted like a dream and not as directly evidence for historical events. So where we are in the Hypnosis and Dreams series is we've covered suggestion hypnosis, higher self-guidance, and regression hypnosis. We're deep diving into the topic of missing time primarily because it's very interesting and relevant. In the future, we will cover dream topics, talking to entities, channeling, remote viewing, so stay tuned for some very interesting topics coming up. And so I have to promote one thing that happened yesterday, which was one of my clients brought her story forward on the Robert Earl White Order of Light YouTube channel. So this is an interview with between Sandra and Robert, as well as Josh of that channel, about her experience. Then she shares the regression hypnosis from start to finish, and then there's a debrief interview about that. It's a fascinating experience. It's very brave of her to bring forward her story in such a strong way, and it's very fascinating. So if you're interested, check out Robert Earl White's Order of Light YouTube channel. I want to promote the case studies that I've been producing on the Cosmic Dream Sanctuary YouTube channel. So I cover, there's about 6 now, all of which deal with missing time, in fact. So if you're interested in learning how hypnosis helps people in relating to missing time, this is a really great place to begin. And then I want to promote tomorrow evening's Exo Metaverse Hangout. I'm the technical co-founder of Exo Metaverse and LightNet, which is a citizen science platform for consciousness. And so I am talking with Preston Dennett. He's the author of 28 books and 100+ articles. And the topic is on listening to and sharing these extraordinary stories of UFO and ET contact. So for more information, you can go to exometaverse.org. So the session tonight will involve definitions and descriptions of the missing time phenomena, considerations and assumptions that have been present in the field, historical perspectives, some theories related to how this is even possible, what's going on. I put forward my own dream theory, and then talk about some practical considerations before we do a very brief practice session. So there is a lot of reading in this session, and it may go a bit longer than 1 hour. You are invited to come and go as you please. I just will say that it is important for us to go through all of the text if you are interested in understanding this very complex and nuanced subject. So I have done work to really condense nearly 6 decades of reading into very select highlighted text for us tonight. So why is missing time hypnosis important? And before I dive into that, I'll just simply say that missing time hypnosis, it is a common practice with the extraterrestrial contact field. Generally, someone might see a UFO, they might have an experience, they might have a screen memory, there's something fishy about a memory, and then lo and behold, they discover that they cannot account for maybe 1 to 2 hours, maybe several days actually of time. And then at some point, they generally relate to a hypnotist who says, we can help you uncover what happened. We can help uncover the memory of what happened to you with the UFO beings. We can recover what happened in the abduction experience and let you know what happened if you just go into trance and relive those memories. You'll understand. So that's generally what is understood to be hypnosis, missing time hypnosis. I am speaking and offering this as a different perspective. I don't believe that's actually the case, and you'll see why when we go through the historical perspectives as to this practice. So why is it important? It defines knowledge. It really, this field, the missing time hypnosis, really does define knowledge for a rather large and growing population of people, particularly, and it's particularly relevant now that there are the UFO disclosure experiences happening at the level of the Pentagon and United States government, and several other governments around the world are releasing data about UFOs. So people might turn to, what have abductees experienced? What can we glean in terms of knowledge about the world based on their seemingly fantastic stories that have been uncovered in hypnosis? So this is one of the reasons why we're talking about it, why it's important. It actually, I believe, defines individual and collective relationships with the transcendent realms, meaning the realms of experience that exist outside of historical space-time. We'll talk about that in a bit. We live in a multidimensional and multidimensional multiverse of consciousness. So this is a theory, this is hypothesis, but it is well grounded in the history of philosophy, of science, actually. So it's important to acknowledge, and we do not actually live in a manifold of historical and material space-time. So we are not living in an objective world. We are not living in a historical space-time world. These are simply myths that the logical mind uses to understand something that is essentially unknowable and therefore transcendent. Therefore, our attitudes and our conscious attitudes and experiences in relating to the transcendent realm have ontological significance. So this is extremely important. This is a very complex way of saying that the attitudes of the hypnotist, the attitudes of the hypnotees, may actually create the phenomenon they're describing. This is really bizarre to say, but this seems to be as plausible as any other theory out there. And you might say this in other words: life is a dream and you are its dreamer. So that's why it's really important to revisit the missing time hypnosis as a means of knowledge, because then it gives us context and freedom to define our perspectives. So I want to offer some suggestions here and now. We may not actually get to a practice session in hypnosis, and that's totally fine, because oftentimes much of my work with the missing time experience happens in conversation and suggestion. So I offer a few perspectives and invite people who have had missing time experiences to explore explore their own relationship to them through providing several concepts, right? So the first one I'd like to put forward for your consideration is that missing time memories can come back as flashbacks triggered by similar images or when integration is possible. So let's invite some of our own missing time experiences, if we have any, our own experiences of the transcendent realm that may not actually fit with our waking ordinary consciousness. We can invite those back by creating a space where integration is possible. We'll also talk about some of the stereotypical abduction cases, right? So there is the experience, people often talk about the image on the book cover of Communion. This is an image of a gray extraterrestrial with the big eyes as triggering. And there have been dozens and dozens of accounts of people saying, I was in a bookstore, I saw this book cover, it was an alien, and then I remembered, and then I had to go get hypnosis myself to uncover what happened, right? So that's a common trope in this field. And so some of the experiences, just be aware, may actually bring up some intuition of memory or something like that. The next suggestion I'd like to put forward is that we live in transcendent consciousness and not a material space-time manifold. Therefore, many strange experiences are possible, and facts can and do overlap. So this is the quantum understanding, right? That things can be both particle and wave, that there is a sense of indefinitiveness about the actual historical objective space-time experience, right? So we understand that we might live in something more like a hologram, something more like a dream, something like a simulation than in a world of Newtonian physics. And in fact, we're about a century beyond the notion of Newtonian physics and the 3 dimensions of space, 1 dimension of time. So let's set aside any of the prejudices that we might have based on this material understanding and just be open to the possibility that we live in a realm of transcendent consciousness, which we might understand as the mind of God, the dreamer behind the universe, or all of these things. Another suggestion I offer is that everyone has had an extraterrestrial or an extra-dimensional contact experience in missing time. So rather than seeing this as a very unique experience, right, rather than seeing this as, oh, why me, it's happening to everybody, right? Even if we take the UFO occupants on their word, if we take the UFO sightings, people who see them, at their word, these craft can move through space and time in ways that are unbelievable, and they're time travelers. They can travel through space in an instant. So why would they limit themselves to only a handful of people, right? So this is a hypothesis, and you can test this in your own experience by being open to the possibility and seeing what happens, right? So the next suggestion is related to this one. Only those who can reasonably integrate memory and knowledge of their experiences perceive intuition or remembrances. Otherwise, the consciousness puts it out. Right? We live in a world where mystical experiences are possible, where you can be absolutely connected to everything at once. And these are not just from the extraterrestrial field, but from the fields of religion and psychology. We understand that we can go into these alternate states of consciousness that really are truly connected through psychic phenomena, psi phenomena, through action at a distance, through quantum mechanics, right? Only those people who are open to it, have the concepts and are willing to work with it, do these intuitions come up and out of. Right? So these experiences, the experiences within the missing time experience, may actually be transcendent. They may be above and beyond historical space-time. They may not directly relate to the physical body, although that might be included. Therefore, they may not be encoded directly as physical memory, but may be directly perceived through intuition, or we might even say psychic capacity. So the final suggestion here is that hypnosis simply invites a situation of safety to integrate existing intuitions of the experience. So, with that, I'll move into definitions to set this within the context of the APA, the American Psychological Association. says that an alien abduction, it's a claim by individuals that they have been kidnapped by extraterrestrial beings. Although the phenomenon is commonly associated with delusional thinking, PTSD, and acute stress reactions, many of these individuals have no other clear symptoms of mental disorder. There is no conclusive scientific evidence to support the validity of their claims. It's also called ET kidnapping, and I don't know who calls it that, actually. The next definition I'll put forward is the recovered memory. This is the subjective experience of recalling a prior traumatic event, such as a sexual or physical abuse, that has been previously unavailable to conscious recollection. Before recovering the memory, the person may be unaware that the traumatic event occurred. The existence of the phenomenon is controversial, particularly in the area of recovered memory of childhood sexual abuse. Because such recoveries may occur while the person is undergoing therapy, there is debate about the role of the therapist that may have in suggesting or otherwise arousing them. So the recovered memory therapy is defined as a form of treatment specifically designed to elicit from the client forgotten or repressed memories of traumatic childhood events, such as sexual abuse. Therapeutic techniques include hypnosis and guided imagery. The therapy is controversial, provoking accusations and even legal disputes about the veracity of the memories retrieved and about the clinical validity and efficacy of the methods used. So these are questions that are coming from the consensus worldview about regression hypnosis in the context of physical events. So much more are there controversies around events that are really difficult to prove, that are really difficult to communicate on. So let's just keep open-minded about this and not really jump to conclusions about the nature of missing time or memory or hypnosis. I want to offer one of the most definitive and stereotypical yet ungrounded accounts of abduction whatsoever. And we'll talk about this in the history, but this is coming from a man named Bud Hopkins, who was an artist turned amateur hypnotist, basically, and wrote a book called Missing Time. He describes a typical abduction scenario, which he based on his direct experience of only 19 cases, right? So I think I have more experience than him, and he wrote the book on this. So we are going to just talk through this a little bit. But he writes, a typical abduction account follows one of several basic scenarios. In fact, it is the presence of certain familiar details in what seemed at first to have been only a routine UFO sighting, which alerts the experienced investigator to inquire more deeply into the case. For this investigator, a mental red flag goes up if the witness seems confused about an unexplained loss of time or complains of certain physical symptoms. As an example, I shall construct a hypothetical abduction case, a composite of commonly reported details from a number of actual accounts. Let us assume that a young man and his wife and a year-old baby are on a trip, driving late at night on a relatively deserted highway. They see a bright light moving in the sky, and suddenly it approaches the car. They realize after a moment or so that it is not a plane or a helicopter or anything familiar. It is soundless, it moves erratically, it can halt suddenly. It is totally unlike any aircraft they have ever seen before. Now it passes low over their car and seems to disappear behind a stand of trees. Then, unaccountably, their engine stalls as its electrical systems fail, and they come to a stop. Next, the UFO flies off from a slightly different position from where they had seen it, and their motor starts up again, seemingly on its own accord. They are bewildered but relieved that things are normal again. What they are not aware of is that it is now 2 hours later. They have all three spent that time inside a landed UFO undergoing some kind of examination, and the entire experience has been blocked from their conscious memories. So this last sentence is really where we can have some considerations. Like what they are not aware of is that they have spent 2 hours later, they have spent all three spent that time inside a landed UFO undergoing some kind of examination, and the entire experience has been blocked from their conscious memories. The events immediately before and immediately after the abduction have been seamlessly joined, leaving them with little or no sense of missing time. So yeah, this is a very typical UFO encounter. The thing that I want to discuss is the assumption that they have been inside the UFO at all. Where does this come from? Where are these notions coming from, right? And that's a good question. Here is the book cover I mentioned earlier. This is the 1987 book Communion by Whitley Strieber. He was a hypnotee of Bud Hopkins, and this story comes up and out of that direct connection. I bring this up because this is the image that triggers oftentimes other people's missing time experiences. This image of this what appears to be a gray extraterrestrial is triggering to some people insofar that it brings back, oh, I saw some. Sometimes there's fear associated with this, and that's just simply interesting to note right now. So some considerations before we dive into the history of missing time hypnosis is that objectivity is an illusion. It's an illusion in general, actually, that we live in an objective 3D Newtonian material world. This is an illusion. The indigenous population doesn't believe in it. The East doesn't necessarily believe in it, but the Western scientific mind does believe in it when it's been impacted by empires of colonialism and capitalism and things like that. So it's really important to acknowledge that we are not living in an objective world, but it is non-dual, meaning that it exists before and after the dualities of object and subject. So we know from the previous study and practice group, and we know from the scientific literature, that hypnosis does not directly deal with memory. Instead, it deals with dreamlike states that may indirectly deal with memory. In fact, though, the scientific literature points out that it is not great at establishing experiences of real, verifiable memory, although it is great at establishing experiences of imaginal, dreamlike nature. Hypnosis does not deal directly with objective and historical facts. So and then the next consideration is that nonverbal communication trumps non-leading questions. This is a strange phrase, but it is saying that there is no such thing as an objective hypnotist. Oftentimes, the criticism of the abduction data, the criticism of hypnosis in service to missing time, is that the hypnotist is implanting memories. And we know that's the case. Hypnotism can implant memories, right? But they say, oh, okay, the hypnotist isn't actually leading the hypnotee if they use non-leading questions, right? So they say, oh, avoid leading questions at all cost, because that leads the client into expressing what the hypnotist wants or something like that. As it turns out, 80% or whatever of communication is nonverbal, right? Is psychic in nature. There's no such thing as an objective hypnotist. It is, and that's just a fact I would offer from my own practical experience, as well as based in philosophy, epistemology, and psychology. It's just we can't clear the field enough to make it an objective container whereby we can extract objective facts. And so that let's just leave it at that. That's not the case. Therefore, hypnosis is a co-participatory journey. That means it is an experience of both the hypnotee and the hypnotist, and they're going on a journey together, participating in it in a way that engages all aspects of their being, right? So this is really important to acknowledge. And finally, the conclusion here is that hypnosis is a dreamlike experience and may be best understood as a sacrament. And so I'll discuss that in a bit. That's sort of a spoiler alert. The conclusion of this is that hypnosis is a dreamlike experience that may be best understood as a sacrament. So I do want to talk about theories as well before we dive into the different readings we have. So integration informs understanding. So experience should inform theory, not the other way. So Without a proper understanding of the non-dual and dreamlike nature of hypnosis, we cause theory to inform experience. This is why I'm talking about this. In other words, our fear of extraterrestrials may actually create extraterrestrials or enable their presence in this world. And so if you're curious about that, you can see the Wild Cosmos paper put out by the Exo Studies Institute that really does a lot of wonderful work compiling all of the theories that are really based in discourse and also evidence of testimony, right? And there is a sense of intersubjective, interdimensional kind of this. It's fantastic. The actual, when you look at the evidence here, the experiences are fantastic and imaginal in nature, and they seem to actually be responding to human participation in a story-like way, almost as if we are living within a game-like simulation or something like that, like a dream. So there are, these are some but not all theories related to missing time. And so we encountered the alien mind control theory, right? Their memories have been blocked when they were in the UFO, but they actually were in the UFO. It's just the aliens did hypnosis to them or mind controlled them or something like that. Another theory in terms of why missing time happens is trauma repression, and this is really prevalent in terms of our folk understanding about how the psyche works. Is that we've had a traumatic event, we push it down, we don't remember it. I would actually say that there is some level of intuition no matter what here, and so that's why I put forward a theory that our capacity for integration of transcendent experiences is what enables or disenables the integration of missing time intuitions. Another theory here is that we're dealing with non-physical and transcendent experiences, right? So these are experiences that may or may not exist within the physical body, but they're very real experiences. And so they may actually be encoded in different ways than our waking consciousnesses. And the final theory I would want to talk about or just mention is around time-sensitive missions, actually. And when you talk to people who have sort of a conscious recollection of some of their ET encounters, they often talk about time-sensitive missions or agendas, something like that, meaning there was a communication and say, this is a communication now that's important for you later. You're not going to, you don't need to remember now, but you'll remember later. And so here, again, it's sort of like a alien mind control scenario, but it's less fearful than, say, there's purpose, there's consent involved, and things like that. So we are now getting into the readings, actually. And in this selection of readings, which may go on a while, I invite you to sort of just be aware of what I'm talking about. You don't have to follow everything, but I wanted to provide historical moments of very, very definitive expressions that established our archetype, our stereotype of alien abduction, and our collective narrative around what missing time and missing time hypnosis is. So I've really spelled this out on this slide, but I just want to say that I've given several slides to each major publication of the author, sometimes of the experience of the experiencer, as well as the perspective and techniques of the hypnotist involved. So there's a lot to go over, but it really establishes a multi-perspective view of this narrative of establishing fearful extraterrestrial encounters in the guise of missing time. All right, so all that said, where does this come from? Well, actually the practice of missing time hypnosis comes from World War II, and it's brought into the field of ET contact through a man named Dr. Simon. And I actually need to show this slide first. So this is Betty and Barney Hill. They are an American couple. They were supposedly abducted by ETs. They had the first really public missing time experience and hypnosis around that. Dr. Simon is their hypnotist. So where does he get the idea to use hypnotists? Well, he in World War II, he worked with both hypnosis and essentially, he calls it narcoanalysis, aka truth serum, to work with people with psychiatric disorders. This body of practice clearly comes from what is literally the torture of war victims. There is no argument against slowly injecting truth serums into people and using this highly aggressive form of hypnosis. There's no justification for it except for torture of war victims in different contexts. And there may be justifications in the historical context, but we really need to call this out to be one of the foundations of our cultural understanding of missing time, regression hypnosis, and we need to cut the historical thread and say, I don't really want to participate in practice in alignment with torture of war victims or with practices that were derived from that. So that's really important to call out. I don't know if anyone else is talking about this. So if you do, let me know. And if this is news to you, feel free to share it with others because it's important to get out. So in World War II, Dr. Simon does his work with truth serums and hypnosis. 1961, Dr. Simon applies hypnosis to the Betty and Barney Hill case. In 1981, artist Bud Hopkins is inspired by Dr. Simon's work, explores hypnosis, and investigates only 19 cases to produce his book, Missing Time. This is where we get really the word missing time. It occurs once in the interrupted journey about the Betty and Barney Hill case, but a tremendous amount of times in Bud Hopkins' book. And from there, it has been kind of in usage, right? In 1987, Whitley Strieber works with Hopkins to uncover his missing time experiences and publishes the book Communion. This is the book cover that we showed. In the 1990s, media narratives consolidate communion as the archetype of ET contact. This is where we get the notion of little ones doing anal probes. This is literally the source of that stereotype, and it informs all future public discourse about this. So it's really important to know this is the thread. It's important to note that both current theory and experiments would not validate Dr. Simon's or Hopkins's understanding of missing time and hypnosis. So we can't really go back to their practice to inform our work here and now. Therefore, we need a new theory of missing time and hypnosis that integrates the experiences of thousands, if not hundreds of thousands or millions of people who have had meaningful hypnotic sessions to relate with their so-called missing time experiences. Again, this is Betty and Barney Hill. Basically, they were driving, they see a UFO, they have 2 hours of missing time. That was explored by Dr. Simon. So who is Dr. Simon? In this, all the text around Betty and Barney Hill come from the book The Interrupted Journey by John Fuller. In World War II, Dr. Simon found it very useful adjunct in the treatment of military psychiatric disorders, first as consultant psychiatric to the General Dispensary in New York, and later on a very extensive scale as chief of neuropsychiatry and executive officer of at Mason General Hospital, the Army's chief psychiatric center in World War II. The responsibility of bringing treatment to 3,000 patients a month made necessary the use of all the varied types of treatments, especially those which could be used in briefer therapy and with groups. Hypnosis and its common companion therapeutic procedure, narcosynthesis, the so-called truth serum, fulfilled these requirements expeditiously and became well established as therapeutic agents. During World War II, hypnosis and narcosynthesis, aka narcoanalysis, were used rather extensively and often interchangeably in the treatment of acute psychiatric disorders. Hypnosis was most effectively used where there was a point of departure, like amnesia. Narcosynthesis was used most frequently to release the anxiety associated with mental conflicts below the surface of consciousness, where a focal point was not so clearly apparent. This was accomplished by the slow injection of a drug, usually sodium amytal or sodium pentothal, the so-called truth serums. So I would say actually that a slow injection of truth serum really is not derived for the treatment of psychiatric disorders. Rather, it is for the torturous interrogation of war victims. So let's not use double talk here. Let's just call it as it is. This is psychiatry in service of torture for war victims. And this is not the basis of theory or practice that I would stand on in my own integrity and practice. So that's why I'm calling this out. So here is the introduction by Benjamin Simon, the hypnotist of the Betty and Barney Hill case. He wrote this in the book, The Interrupted Journey, for John Fuller. And these are the words of Dr. Simon. So I feel that I should make clear the status of hypnosis because of public misconceptions which often envelop hypnosis with an arcane charisma and the practitioner with the robe of Merlin. Hypnosis is a useful procedure in psychiatry to direct concentrated attention on some particular point in the course of the whole therapeutic procedure. In cases like the Hills, it can be the key to the locked room, the amnesic period. Under hypnosis, experiences buried in amnesia may be recalled in a much shorter time than in the normal course of psychotherapeutic process. Nevertheless, there is little produced under or by hypnosis that is not possible without. The charisma of the hypnosis has tended to foster belief that hypnosis is the magical and royal road to truth. In one sense, this is so, but it must be understood that hypnosis is a pathway to truth as it is felt and understood by the patient. The truth is what he believes to be the truth, and this may or may not be consonant with the ultimate non-personal truth. Most frequently it is. To the entire, that was Benjamin Simon's understanding of hypnosis. It's kind of similar to mine, actually, in that it is truth for the patient, but may not actually be the objective truth. I would say that the ultimate non-personal truth is a fiction of the Western delusions and things like that. So here is a description of the Hills missing time experience. This is written by John Fuller. We're no longer in the words of Dr. Simon. To the entire group in the Hill living room that afternoon, the missing time period became a major mystery. Here they're discussing their experiences. The Hills tried, but simply could not account for it, nor could they account for the 35 miles between Indian Head and Ashland, during which their recollection amounted to almost nothing. They were now more puzzled and confused than ever. For the first time, it fully dawned on them that they were facing a period of simultaneous amnesia, experienced by each of them at the same time, falling roughly between the first series of beeps that emanated from the back of their car and the second series of beeps they encountered somewhere near Ashland, 35 miles to the south. The thought that plagued everyone at the meeting was that while it was unusual enough for one person to be struck suddenly with a temporary period of amnesia, it was very strange for two intelligent people to experience it together under such fantastic conditions. So this is really one of the first descriptions of the missing time phenomenon. Again, we're back with Dr. Simon. He's discussing the stages of hypnosis, and so he says, there are generally described three stages of hypnosis: light, medium, and heavy. In the light stage, catalepsy of the eyelids, an ability to open the eyes at will, can be produced on suggestion, and a certain degree of general suggestibility is present. Post-hypnotic suggestions may be given, and a great deal of treatment can be accomplished. In the medium stage, paralysis of volitional control of the larger muscles of the body may produce major catalepsy. In this stage, analgesia and sensitivity to pain may be successfully suggested. And again, we must wonder how they test it. In the third stage, or the somnambulistic stage, almost any phenomenon can be produced, and the patient will be amnesic unless he is definitively told to recall the trance experience. This was to play an important part in the treatment of the hills. Positive or negative hallucinations may be induced, and post-hypnotic suggestions given in the somnambulistic stage will be very effective. Activity of the autonomous nervous system manifested by blushing, constriction of skin vessels, and slowing of the pulse can be produced. There is conflict among authorities on this matter, but there are reports of actual blistering by the suggestion of intense heat. So I included this phrase, this reading, particularly to give a context of Dr. Simon's perspective, but also because of his use of the word somnambulistic. So in this understanding, which also informed Dolores Cannon, who we will talk about later, and I believe is the source of her use of the somnambulistic phase of consciousness. I've often wondered, where does she get the word somnambulistic? And I believe this is actually where she gets it from. Here is the theory of amnesia that is being put forward in association with Dr. Simon and the Betty and Barney Hill case. The opening up of amnesia requires the use of time regression, wherein the patient's memory becomes vivid and exact. Details long forgotten to the conscious mind emerge sharply. And here we have to note that modern studies suggest that these vivid and exact details are experienced vivid and exact, but may or may not correspond with actual memory. They may actually correspond with imaginal experiences that in themselves are informed by memory. It is not unusual for persons in hypnosis to recall the name and color of the eyes of everyone at his 5th birthday party, if so requested, even if that may have taken place decades before. There is also the tendency to relive, recreate, and reenact the time segment being recalled, so that the subject again goes through emotions involved in the original experience, a process referred to abreaction. The physician must always be cognizant that in bringing to light unconscious memories and feelings, these may be intolerable to the patient and could lead to serious after reactions. At times, the subject may emerge from trance. If he feels threatened, he may refuse to go further, or as in the case of Barney Hill, he may plead to be taken out of trance without emerging on his own. Often when the emotional release or abreaction comes, the patient feels measurable release. The doctor's control of the patient during hypnosis is essential. This was to be demonstrated later as the suggestions continue. I find this is absolutely offensive, actually, in terms of working with patients. It's absolutely offensive. Primarily because it is disempowering of the client, it is a false understanding, and it is establishes a control narrative of the doctor, right? So the appropriate thing to do is to create a situation in the consciousness that can integrate in a kind and gentle way the memories, right? So if we create a situation that can receive these memories and integrate them in a kind and gentle way, they will come on their own. They do not need to be forced, as if this were torture of war victims. So let's get into Barney's experience. This is, again, words of John Fuller quoting Barney Hill. Dr. Simon began talking to me. Barney described the process, telling me that I was relaxing, and he had me clasp my hands together and that they would be tight, very tight, that I couldn't open them no matter how hard I tried. And I was standing there feeling very, very foolish because I thought, if this is hypnosis, there's nothing to it. I'm just humoring the man. I didn't want to hurt his feelings. I think he stopped and placed his hands over my eyes so that they would close. I said to myself that I wasn't really hypnotized, and when he told me that I couldn't pull my hands apart, I knew that all I had to do was open my fingers, and I could do it. But I just didn't feel like opening my fingers. I didn't even feel like I was asleep, but then I was aware that he was waking me up and asking me how I felt. And I felt very, very good, very calm and comfortable, and no longer then had any fear of hypnosis. As so often happens, the patient feels he is humoring the operator, pretending to be cooperative, and without his knowing it, he moves into a deep trance with no knowledge or memory of what happened, unless the operator tells him he can remember. The two simple cue words creating rapid inductions were repeated several times during the early sessions, along with tests to check the validity and depth of the trance. So here we see that he is establishing the induction of trance and associating that with cue words. Again, there is no need to fool people. There is no need to fool them, to trick out knowledge from them. It is a co-participatory journey. That's what I'll keep coming back to here. After the first, continuing on with Barney's experience, after the first test, Barney Hill recalls, a curious thing happened. As I got ready for the induction into hypnosis, I looked at my watch. It must have been 5 minutes after 8. And he gave me the keyword, and I was hypnotized. As far as time was concerned, I thought he was waking me up immediately. But I looked at my watch, and it was after 9. I must have been without consciousness for an hour, yet it seemed like no time at all. So here we'll describe some of the tests. Again, this is a questionable foundation for practice. The doctor further tested the Hills during the 3 preliminary sessions with various post-hypnotic suggestions, such as asking them 3 minutes after they were awakened to smoke a cigarette, which they would taste so bad that they would have to crush out. Until Dr. Simon had the whole story and could assess its emotional effect, he was careful to make sure that the amnesia was reinstated after each session. A psychologically determined amnesia is commonly the loss of memory for painful ideas or experiences that serve to keep them out of consciousness. Through the concentration of attention brought on by hypnosis, the opposite of amnesia is often created, hypermnesia, or superlative memory. Barney took his seat in front of the doctor's desk. He started to reach for a cigarette, but on the cue words from Dr. Simon, his eyes closed and his head nodded. His hands were folded across his lap. He looked like anyone who had dozed over his morning paper while he sat in an easy chair. The deep trance was induced, and satisfying himself that Barney was fully entranced, the doctor began the session. Doctor, he is completing his reinforcement of the trance. You are deeper asleep, deep asleep. You will remember everything now, and you will tell me everything. Barney says yes. The doctor says, and I want you to tell me in full detail all your experience, all your thoughts, all of your feelings, beginning with the time you left your hotel. Were you in Montreal? And Barney says, his voice on the tape is now amazingly flat, monotonous, and trance-like in contrast to his animated tones of normal conversation. He responds to the doctor's question with bluntness, little inflection, in a curious monotone, and with measured precision. We did not stay in Montreal. We stayed in a motel. And so with that it concludes the discussion on Betty and Barney Hill and the use of hypnosis. I hope this gives you a clue as to what type of hypnosis brought forward one of the earliest cases of missing time and our general understanding of missing time. From here, they describe being in a ship with beings that kind of look like Nazis. There's a star map that it kind of points to Zeta Reticuli, and there's a lot more information about this case, and check it out as you find interesting. I want to skip next into the next period in the major history of missing time regression. This is Bud Hopkins. He is an abstract artist. This is an introduction. We heard from him earlier about his version of the typical abduction narrative. And so this is from his introduction of the book Missing Time, published in 1981. And then in 1965, a story was published in a Boston newspaper about the temporary abduction of 2 people, Mr. and Mrs. Barney Hill, by the occupants of a UFO. Their memories had been somehow blocked, and the kidnapping, which occurred in 1961, had only recently emerged through regressive hypnosis in the course of psychotherapy. At the time, many serious UFO researchers found the account difficult to believe, though now, a decade and a half later, the Hills account is only one of literally hundreds very much like it. Since 1976, I have been involved to varying degrees with the investigation of 19 similar abduction cases involving 37 people. These 19 cases have yielded clear patterns, though the 37 people involved form a random cross-section of professions, ages, and social backgrounds. I need to say here that it is not a random cross-section. In fact, these are only individuals who are responding to the personal and subjective charisma of Bud Hopkins and his investigative team. These are people who are karmically related. These are people who respond to his understanding of the hypnosis, and they find validation in that narrative, right? This is really important to know. I know as a hypnotist that my clients come to me by way of synchronicity and dream and meaning and connection. There is a lot deeper connection than just randomness. At this time, continuing on with Bud Hopkins, at this time in the unfolding history of the UFO phenomenon, it seems to me as if these quite similar abductions constitute some kind of systematic research program with the human species as subjects. Individuals or small groups of people are involuntarily borrowed, and most often the memory of such encounter is effectively erased from the individual's consciousness, presumably by some sort of post-hypnotic suggestion. UFO investigators have come to rely upon regressive hypnosis as the most effective method of unlocking the forgotten time period, usually an hour or two, and recovering the often harrowing account of what actually happened. Psychiatrists and psychologists who practice hypnosis have thus become our most helpful allies. And again, so we can clearly see the influence of Dr. Simon here in the establishment of amnesic periods, right? They say it worked really well with the torture of war victims and in establishing amnesia around that and applying these wartime technologies to our population. But really, it may or may not be the case that post-hypnotic suggestion is even operative in the missing time experience. I want to give voice to the hypnotist involved, one of the hypnotists involved with Bud Hopkins. This is Aphrodite Lamar, and she writes here about her experience, and also I will read a bit about her hypnotic induction process to give kind of context to that as well. So these are her words. This is in an afterword by Aphrodite Lamar put to the book Missing Time by Bud Hopkins. The sense that the UFO experience is a taboo experience to be recalled or shared only reluctantly soon becomes apparent to the hypnotherapist who works with these subjects. One reason for this reluctance may be that the memory of the UFO abduction has been repressed because of its traumatic nature. The mind has a way of protecting itself by repressing painful or frightening experiences. In extreme cases of this kind, we call the repression amnesia. In the case of the 5 UFO abductees described in this book, the amnesia was temporary. Under hypnosis, facts and events that had not previously told about came to the fore. In my judgment, if these were to undergo additional hypnotic suggestions, additional details would arise to the surface. The question persists, is the UFO experience genuine, or are those who claim to have been abducted the victims of hysteria or their own delusions? After spending more than 50 hours with a dozen subjects under hypnosis, I still cannot answer the question. Aliens from outer space are the stuff of science fiction. The photographs and other physical evidence that would establish these experiences as something more than fantasy remain disturbingly elusive. And yet, the events recounted by a variety of people from scattered places are strikingly similar, suggesting that there might be more to the whole business than mere coincidence. So here she discusses her induction process. This is the process where we invite trance and to engage with the regression experience. I began by employing techniques that I had used with the patients in my practice as a clinical psychologist and psychotherapist, making whatever changes I found useful as I developed greater experience with UFO witnesses, on the assumption that reliving the UFO abduction, if this was indeed what it was, might prove to be traumatic. I sought to make the experience of hypnosis as easy, even comfortable as possible, while at the same time giving the subjects a sense of control over what was happening to them. thank you, Aphrodite Lamar, for doing this work for us and really reversing some of the issues that Dr. Simon brought to the field. With these considerations in mind, I started each opening 90-minute session with an information gathering interview asking for a short life history and other relevant background material. I offered an opportunity to experience hypnosis for its own sake, unrelated to the UFO encounter. This trial run, I suggested, would acquaint the subject with hypnosis so that in future sessions, the process of being hypnotized and what it felt like to be under hypnosis would be familiar rather than strange. In this way, the subjects would be free to concentrate their energies on the experiences which they were reliving. I do that as well. I recommend the sense of trial run. I also wanted to dispel the notion that hypnosis was a knockout, unconscious experience for those who undergo it. I emphasized that they would still be able to be aware of things going on around them, that they would be able to not only hear my voice, but also talk with me, to open their eyes if need be, to move around and even write, all while remaining under hypnosis. For our purpose, I explained hypnosis would be a useful tool, though not necessarily a precise one, that would enable us to explore, relive, and possibly understand the mysterious events that had reported earlier. Finally, I said there was no way of predicting in advance what, if anything, would emerge. She's really good, actually. I appreciate her description. I then asked the subject to lie down on a cozy, comfortable brown leather couch in the darkened book-lined room that is my office. I took my place on a high-backed wooden chair at the head of the couch. When the subject was comfortable and at ease, I began what I came to think of as build your own cloud exercise, using standard progressive relaxation and deepening techniques to induce hypnosis. In the hypnotic state, the subjects were asked to visualize a fluffy, inviting cloud of any shape, design, or color they wished, sturdy enough to support their weight and equipped with whatever objects or devices they might need when the cloud became the vehicle to return to the past experiences we would explore together. When this image was in focus, they were asked to imagine themselves stepping into the cloud, exploring it, making sure that it was satisfactory, then letting themselves lie back, relax, and go on a short ride. Thus, the cloud becomes a private environment, one that fits the subject's specific needs, a friendly object that they can control, direct, and a personal image of unequaled possibilities. This, in fact, is very, very similar to the work of Dolores Cannon in the QHHT, quantum healing hypnosis technique. So now we get to communion, and it is 6 o'clock, so this is normally the time that we would shift into a discussion, but since we are engaged in this reading practice, I invite you to continue as you see fit, and knowing that this is recorded and will be on YouTube, you can come and go as you see fit. This image, actually, I would invite you to just tune in to see if it evokes any memories, knowing that this is a common trope in terms of missing time. Seeing this cover, right? What do you feel? What does it feel like to look at this cover? Is he smiling? Is there a sense of abyss in the eyes? I notice a sense of depth in the eyes. I notice a sense of smile, but also thin lips that make me feel uneasy. There's a sense of intelligence there. Some people have a feeling that these have visited them in the night or in UFOs or something like that, and there may be some sort of resonance that you're feeling in your body as you look to this, not knowing what it is, and that's fine. We don't have to define this as an extraterrestrial, but seeing this as an archetype of contact or something like that, knowing that you are capable of integrating any of the memories that may be arising, any of the intuitions, any of the feelings, because you are here, because those are coming up, because your psyche wants you to integrate those memories. And it believes you are capable of doing so in a reasonable way. All right, so I will read a little bit from Whitley Strieber. This is I would say, the definitive work that establishes and consolidates the archetype of alien abduction in our media narratives that is still present today, even though there has been much more research into the phenomenon. So this is Whitley Strieber's voice describing his memory. I just could not bear this memory, and I could not get rid of it. What on earth were those things? What had they done to me? Were they real, or was I the victim of some unknown mental state? I remembered that a man named Bud Hopkins had been mentioned in the book as a prominent researcher in the field. The name had been familiar to me. Anne and I are interested in art, and Hopkins is a well-known abstract artist, collected by the Guggenheim and the Whitney. I found his name in the phone book. But how could I call him? What a stupid thing to have to admit. Little men, flying saucers. How idiotic. I recognized clearly, though, that if I had another moment of despair that intense, I was going to go out the window, no question. I owed it to my family who loved and depended on me to try and help myself. I called Bud Hopkins. He answered the phone and listened to my story for a few minutes. I thought I would wither away with embarrassment telling it, but he soon interrupted me. Could I come over, like right now? It turned out that his place in the city was a 10-minute walk from mine. Hopkins was a large, intense man with one of the kindest faces I have ever seen. I later discovered that he was bright and canny, but at that time he assumed a guileless appearance. The moment our interview began, Hopkins explained to me that he was not a therapist, but he could put me in touch with one if I wanted. He then got the facts from me that I have recorded here. As I sat there in that man's living room, listening to him tell me that I wasn't alone, that others had gone through very much the same thing, the tears rolled down my cheeks, and I went from wanting to hide it all to wanting to understand it. So that's really a beautiful transformation, actually, in terms of the situation. And there is a sort of mixed establishment. The sense here with the communion here, this is literally where we get the stereotype of anal probes and abductions, and it's like in the common media. This is literally where it comes from. So it's important to understand that this is a very real experience for everyone involved. And I'm not saying that in any of these experiences are unreal. I'm saying that they require participation in the interpretation of hypnotic memory, and that there's a bit more complexity than what the 20th century would offer. So now we get into some of the critiques from the 20th century. Jacques Vallée, who is known as Lacombe in The Close Encounters of the Third Kind, he is the Frenchman that goes and is sort of like mysteriously at all the spots of contact, and he seems to know something in that film. This is the man, Jacques Vallée. He writes about the pitfalls of abduction data in his book Dimensions, which was published in 1988. There are now hundreds of documented claims of abductions, that is, instances when the witness of a close encounter has recalled under hypnosis that he or she was forcibly taken inside a UFO. Generally, the witness describes one of the standard scenes that we have reviewed. Some medical examination is performed and instruments are inserted into the human patient, often causing trauma or pain. The examination is often gynecological in nature, culminating in the removal of a woman's fetus in the case described at length by Bud Hopkins, who argues that all this points to an extraterrestrial race trying to enrich itself or even to preserve its future through biogenetic engineering. Evidence that such encounters are real is allegedly provided by scars on the witnesses' bodies and by the missing time in their conscious recollection of the events surrounding the abduction, which is only clearly remembered under hypnosis. The granddaddy of all abduction cases remains the Betty and Barney Hill episode of 1961. And I do need to say at this moment that because of the public sharing of Sandra's story on the channel of Order of Light, that follows this narrative very strongly. She did not uncover most of the memories through hypnosis. They were established, but she had an understanding of exactly what happened before she encountered me. So I would say that it is conscious memory in her case, and that the hypnosis was an assisting thing. So I want to add that clarification in case there is a perception of strangeness in supporting a client's public story and presenting this pitfall of abduction data. I'm providing all of this to say this field is immensely complex and strange. So back to it. The abduction data are obviously of greatest interest. The information is usually presented in the UFO literature, for example, in John Fuller's Interrupted Journey or in Bud Hopkins' Intruders, as the ultimate argument in favor of the extraterrestrial theory. The abductions are said to provide us with the missing motives of the coming of the UFOs. They need human specimens to study our race, not only to understand but to interbreed with us, to provide new genetic material for their own survival. The parallels between these modern claims and the medieval legends is closer than ever. The same theory was presented about intercourse with the elves. I have shown that fairy tales are full of stories about stealing of human babies, changelings, and the abductions of both males and females for procreation with the gentry. Even the scars sound familiar. Bud Hopkins and scores of other UFOologists carefully examined UFO witnesses for unexplained scars or marks that might indicate that they were victims of an abduction, perhaps one they cannot recall consciously. What does all this mean? Let us forget that under hypnosis, in the majority of cases, hypnosis have been poorly performed under the leadership of untrained practitioners or even rank amateurs. Let us ignore the leading questions, the preconceptions about the answers, and the extreme suggestibility of the witnesses subjected to such unscientific practices. The skeptics and the debunkers will have a field day with these obvious flaws, and for once I agree with them. But let us forget these picture problems and take all the material at face value. Do we obtain a picture that suggests extraterrestrial contact with advanced visitors? My answer is an emphatic no. I asked earlier, what kind of spacecraft pilots are these if they still need to use maps to navigate? And here he is referring to the star map of Zeta Reticuli in the Betty and Barney Hill case. Now I have to ask, what kind of doctors are these who need to induce such trauma in hundreds of patients to collect a little blood or a few embryos? Again, I want to point out that we are not actually engaged with hypnosis in a scientific endeavor. This is not scientific, and this is an assumption that I would like to call out here and now, that hypnosis is not in service to the scientific or the objective understanding of anyone. It is a co-participatory journey to healing, transformation, and insight, of integration of transcendent experiences, and therefore is not subject or needing to deal with all of these the rigor that this man would like to see in the field. But on the other hand, we cannot use hypnotic testimony, if understood that way, as historical evidence. All right. So that was Jacques Vallée. Very interesting course of study. This takes us to our penultimate hypnotist that I will be reading from, John Mack, from his 1994 work, Abduction. Here I want to present another view of the hypnotic induction technique. John Mack is a well-respected, somewhat controversial psychiatrist, actually. He was head of Harvard Psychiatry. He was commissioned by the U.S. government to look into the credibility of witness reports in the military or the Air Force regarding UFO sightings and abduction. And so he went on a journey to go, oh, actually, these people don't seem insane. There seems to be something in here. And I was curious about what method of hypnosis he used. So the use of hypnosis by John Mack, again, coming from 1994. The type of hypnosis or non-ordinary state I employ has been modified by my training and experience in the holotropic breathwork method developed by Stanislav and Christina Grof. Grof, by the way, has been a faculty of CIIS, and I have enjoyed a cup of coffee with him in the cafe. So, and I have also enjoyed the holotropic breathwork. It's a wonderful modality. Grof breathwork utilizes deep, rapid rapid breathing, evocative music, a form of bodywork, and mandala drawing for the investigation of unconscious and for therapeutic growth. In its emphasis on the breath, the Graf method has much in common with ancient meditative practices. I have found that maintaining a focus on the breath as a tool for centering and integration in association with hypnosis is invaluable in working with abductees. This is related to the extraordinary intensity of the energies involved, connected apparently with the power of the original experience, manifested in bodily sensations, movements, and strong emotions, especially terror, rage, and sadness that come up as recall of the abduction experience takes place. After a simple induction that includes soothing imagery, a systematic relaxation of the parts of the body, and frequent return to the attention of the breath, you might even notice those aspects in a lot of the work we do, a lot of the quantum healing work, a lot of the depth hypnosis work involves these aspects, by the way. I encourage the experiencer to envision a comforting and relaxing place to which the experiencer may automatically return at any time during the session. This enables the individual to mediate the pace of remembering and reinforce the priority I place on his or her well-being. Thank you, John Mack. Because of the recurrent and unpredictable timing of these experiences, I have found that it is best not to use the word safe in describing this imagined refuge. For many experiencers, especially in the early stage of uncovering, there is no such thing as safety, and to suggest it is to deny the full power of the experience. I would actually challenge that notion of safety. I believe there is safety in fully integrating these experiences and inhabiting and embodying a sense of sovereign free will, a sense of sovereign free will there. I do not believe we are out of control, but that we are invited on a deeper journey of integration and embodiment of our own conscious sovereignty. Anyways, back to the text. As is often true of survivors of other traumatic events who seek to bring the events into full consciousness, abductees want to remember. Sometimes there is a danger that the unfolding of the narrative, the recall of the abduction experiences, will run ahead of the abductee's defenses once again, resulting in their becoming overwhelmed and traumatized. Through focusing on the breath during the induction process and the hypnosis session itself, the experiencer is able to be grounded and to approach their experiences with greater strength. I explained to the abductee at the beginning of the session that I am more interested in their integration of their recalled experiences as we go along than in getting their stories. Again, this is really great. The story I explain will take care of itself in due time. So again, let's just note that he calls them abductees, not contactees. So there is an implied kidnapping experience, even though there may or may not be actual memory of that experience before the hypnosis. So that's important to note. This is why I use the word contactee, and I use vague language in terms of describing it. This takes us to 1998 with Dolores Cannon, who brought forward the QHHT methodology. She says she brought people down into the somnambulistic state of consciousness to channel the subconscious, aka the higher self, to provide information. This isn't necessarily about her induction process, but it is a description of concepts of time that I think is really helpful to massage the mind in terms of relating to these experiences of alleged abduction, but also of the missing time. Yeah. Many investigators have explored cases of missing time where several hours pass inexplicably without the person being aware of the lapse. I will discuss several later in this book, but I have discovered a concept which I find even stranger, cases of condensed time. This is where the events take place in far less time than normally would take. Of course, both these phenomena are examples of time being mysteriously distorted from the participant's point of view. We are hampered by being trapped within our... And I think this is at core to the matter. And anyways, back to Dolores. It has been said we may be the only planet in the universe that has invented a way to measure something that does not exist. I've been told many times in my work that time is only an illusion, an invention of man. The aliens do not have this concept, and they have told me that man will never travel in space unless he overcomes the erroneous idea of time. This is one of the main problems that keeps man trapped on Earth. Even though we might understand this from a psychological point of view, it is difficult, if not impossible, for our human minds to accept. We are thoroughly entrenched in time, with our life composed of and measured in minutes, hours, days, weeks, months, and years. I do not see any way we can escape this concept and still function in a normal workaday world. And that is primarily because of the ritual expression of the roads, the rectilinear buildings, the kind of capitalistic narratives that we enjoy, I would say, are the cause, almost a magical cause of our being trapped in this sense of time. Back to her words, we believe that things must progress from point A to point B in an orderly fashion within a certain amount of time. There can be no deviation, no taking of side trips because they do not fit into our belief system. Thus, our focus is very narrow. Anything that lies beyond that focus is said to be impossible and therefore cannot happen. It cannot exist. If we lived on a planet that revolves around its sun in a different manner, how would we measure time? Suppose there was always sunlight or always darkness. Suppose the planet had two suns. Would they measure time in a different way, or would they decide there was no need for such an inconvenience? What about beings traveling on spaceships for long periods of time, hurtling through space with no reference point to distinguish day and night, and no reason to mark off the seasons and years? It is no wonder why they do not understand our purpose for time, and often can make no sense of it. Under similar and even more radical circumstances, we might decide that there was no purpose served by creating time and adhering to it so dogmatically. And I would have to add too that these beings appear to be time travelers as well as space travelers in magical ways. So that adds to the complexity. Back to Dolores's last paragraph here. Having no such restrictions, they have been free to discover other dimensions and planes of existence that are hidden from us by a rigid time structure. Having made these discoveries, they have found ways to dematerialize and rematerialize anything they wish to transport. They can slip and slide through cracks and crevices to other dimensions as easily as walk through a door. Of course, they may have been doing this long before our ancestors were living in caves, and we would have much catching up to do. But we would never find these cracks until we remove the blinders that tell us it is impossible. If another humanoid species have discovered the way, then it is possible for us. If they have been mentally feeding us information we have needed down through the aeons of our existence, then they may be even now trying to relay the secrets of dissolving the barriers of time and show us where the golden doors lie. And I would say, actually, the interaction I had in the Book of Galactic Light with the celestial angelic beings is a clear and distinct invitation to using these golden doors. And it lies through a path of meditation, contemplation, forgiveness, love, unity consciousness. For more information, you can check out that playlist. So ending the discussion, ending all the readings, thank you for your presence here. I just want to name some of the notable hypnotists in a field of missing time. We had Benjamin Simon from the Betty and Barney Hill case. We've got Bud Hopkins, who wrote the book Missing Time with Aphrodite Lamar as one of the hypnotists he turns to. We've got John Mack, who is often well respected and considered the kind of more shamanic aspects of the experiences. Then we've got David Jacobs, who was a history professor who is a problematic hypnotist and has often been quoted by people who want to establish ET threat narrative. So that's important to understand. We've got Leo Sprinkle, who was featured in the Extraordinary Stan Romanek documentary. We've got Barbara Lamb and Mary Rodwell, who are actively doing wonderful work. And then Dolores Cannon, who we heard from, and Candace Craw Goldman, who is the founder of the Beyond Quantum Healing methodology, who we will be talking to on the EXO Hangout in about a month. All right, so I'm going to aim to finish this up in about 10 or 15 minutes, but I want to put my own dream theory forward. So I need to just I'll run through the arguments that the hypnosis is a dreamlike experience, and that the work of doing hypnosis is something like a religious sacrament. So let's check some assumptions. Hypnosis is a dreamlike experience, and it is not directly reliving memory. Right? So we understand this from the scientific literature. It is a dreamlike experience. It's not to say it's not memory, because dreams bring forward memories. Dreams are psychic in nature. They're potent, but they are not directly memory. So that requires interpretation, right? It is subjectively meaningful, but it does not produce objective facts on its own. And in fact, we don't actually know what the nature of objective facts are if we are relating to a transcendent space that is time and space traveling, right? So it's sort of like talking about objective facts in Back to the Future, where Marty McFly is disappearing from a photograph. We need to point to the fact that hypnosis clearly relies on the charisma and perspective of the hypnotist, which is neither repeatable nor objective, right? We need to call forward the fact that hypnosis provides meaningful insight to both individual and collective worldviews. And so we may understand this type of knowledge as mythos, using the Greek word mythos, not logos. And for a wonderful distinction on that, you can check out Plato, the source of one of the sources of Western philosophy, in his discussion of the Socratic myths, where Socrates had something like interactions with these transcendent realms and tries to talk about it. He stops talking about it in terms of rational words, aka logical words, aka logos, and starts using narrative stories of myths, of mythos, aka mythology, which is not to say it's false. Mythos means knowledge that is communicated in words, not through logic, right? And so the assumption that we are dealing with ordinary consensus historical space-time is an assumption. I would say we rather deal with the domain of transpersonal, imaginal, and transcendent. As part of the dream theory, I want to put forward alternatives to remembering, right? It is only an assumption that we can remember missing time experiences by reversing the processes of repression. That's sort of the general understanding of how missing time works. It's only an assumption, right? And I would say, actually, in my case with Sandra this week, that has been shared on YouTube, the hypnosis, that the process wasn't a reversal of repression, nor was it, nor were those memories actually repressed. Much rather, I provided a space of integration and healing, whereby the retelling of those experiences provided a sense of integration and healing. And it was done in a sense of almost consciousness. Life is a story. Life is a dream, right? This is an alternative theory. Much of the joy of stories involves the dramatic revelation of knowledge. So we might understand missing time hypnosis as revealing dramatic narrative information for the purpose of shaping your life story. So this is one thing. It's like, oh wow, I discovered this, that, or the other thing about myself in the hypnosis experience that sets you on a different path. This is sort of like the controlled release of knowledge from the transcendent realms to here. Another theory I offer is space-time transcendence. So the missing time experience may happen in a domain outside of space-time, outside of these 3 dimensions of space and 1 dimension of historical time. Therefore, relating to historical past events of the missing time experience may actually be relating to the transcendent realm. And in fact, this is the experience I had with Dan Berg, one of the first case studies I put forward in terms of his experience is actually relating to that experience, not as memory, but as portal to a transcendent realm. So then we might understand remembrance of these missing time experiences as the development of psi or spiritual capacities to engage consciously with those transcendent realms. This is about regression as a dreamlike experience. So the scientific literature is clear that regression is a questionable memory tool. It's questionable. It works, but it's questionable. It's not admitted to courts of law or most courts of law. The state of hypnosis is best understood to be like a daydream, and the physiological state is best understood as a nap. The language of somnambulistic and things like that seem to be an irrelevant understanding from the last century. Dreams may involve exotic states of consciousness or abilities. In fact, we see precognitive dreams, we see telepathic dreams, we see dreams of memory, and all sorts of things, right? So dreams are inherently beyond conscious understanding and control, but they respond to insight and intention, right? The final thing I will say about dreams is that they lead to healing, insight, and transformation. When we hold that intention, that is where they lead. Therefore, regression hypnosis may be considered to be a set of dream incubation instructions or suggestions for establishing lucid intent in the dreamlike experience of hypnosis. So we induce the trance, we provide suggestions to have a dreamlike experience that results in the intention. And what is the intention? Sometimes it's to remember things, but sometimes it is to integrate the missing time experience. And so when we work together, when I work with people, I use language that isn't necessarily around recollecting memory unless that's their desire. Oftentimes I will say it is just simply for the purpose of healing, insight, or transformation for your benefit. What this means is that we have to interpret hypnosis like a dream. So we can always look to a personal sense of discernment and a personal sense of authority in the interpretation. The dreamer is the authority in the interpretation of the dream. This is extremely important, right? So I can offer my opinions as to what the experience seems like to me, but the person who undergoes the hypnosis, they're the one that gets to decide, was this a thing that happened to me? Was this a made-up experience? Was this something else? It's not the work of the objective researcher. It's not the work of the author to make that decision. It is the person who had the experience, the hypnotee. They get to interpret their own hypnotic experience. And so how we relate to that collectively is really interesting, and using that as a collective means of knowledge is a huge question. I need to point out there are many ways of meaning making with hypnosis and dreams. Healing, insight, and transformation. Those are generally the ways we receive meaning. So even if it doesn't yield historical knowledge, it yields sometimes healing, insight, and transformation. We can understand a lot of this as inspiration and not evidence. So if there is more information to be gleaned, right? Like if we want to use hypnosis as evidence, we have to support it through things that are actually evidence, like facts and physical objects or whatever. There are many, many ways of knowing within the context of the dream. It's memories that can be karmic imprints, akashic record readings, emotions, body things, psychic perceptions such as remote viewing, telepathy, or even just fantasy and imagination as the expression of intuition. So these are all the things that we can think about when we're interpreting a hypnotic session. Is this memory? Is this akashic? Is this telepathic? Then finally, I'm coming to the last point, and this is one of the newest points I'm getting to, is that regression is something like a religious sacrament. So a sacrament is a holy event between a priest and a parishioner, something like that. So this might be the sacrament of confession. This might be a sacrament of baptism, sacrament of the Holy Eucharist. These are sacraments in the context of Christianity. These are I would say, in perhaps like Buddhist experience, the vow-taking experience, the refuge vow, the bodhisattva vow is a sacrament, right? So this is relating to a transcendent realm. And the reason why I say this is that we're dealing with a client-practitioner model. we are dealing with a psychospiritual and transcendent domain, not a historical space-time domain, not a therapy domain, not a metaphysical, not a medical or physical domain, but a psychospiritual and transcendent domain. The meaning making relies on articles of faith. For example, that the ETs are UFO occupants, that we can trust them in what they're saying, that there are these, a lot of different things. Whatever we're saying, it requires an article of faith to relate to it in a specific way, because we're not actually dealing with that here and now, right? It deals with hypnosis, missing time hypnosis, deals with non-human intelligences and entities that have been traditionally called angelic or demonic. That is to say, powerful intermediary messenger beings, right? So these are the entities that we get to in the missing time hypnosis, who we interact with, and they often will express themselves, at least in my experience, in synchronicity, in messages, in communications that are active up and outside of that episode of missing time. Finally, the other several reasons why I think it is sacrament is that the outcomes include healing, insight, and transformation, which is traditionally, and the outcomes are magical and miraculous or psi in nature. So this is traditionally the domain of religion. So therefore, I say, missing time hypnosis may best be considered as a religious sacrament. And so, how are we to make sense of this? Are we, is this a new religion? I say no, actually. I say no. And I invite us to return to one of the earliest archetypes of this encounter, and that is the Asclepius and the Asclepian rites. So Asclepius is the ancient Greek god of dreams and healing. He is represented by the snake and staff symbol, which you can see in the bottom of the slide, which is the symbol for medicine, right? So this is ancient stuff we're dealing with. This is nothing new I'm offering. I'm just saying, hey, this seems really familiar, right? Asclepius himself is a shape-shifting reptilian who resides in celestial realms. This is exactly the same sort of stuff we're talking about now in terms of the reptilians, the Illuminati, like 30% of the UFO occupants seem to be reptilian in nature and seem to have the capacity of psionic communication, of establishing dream experiences. They really literally say this, and of performing miraculous healings. I say Asclepius is very, very similar and perhaps even an archetype for these reptilian encounters, right? So what is the Asclepian rite, right? So an Asclepion is an ancient healing temple dedicated to dreams and healing. You would go there if you needed something done, if you needed healing. And so you would have a ritual conversation with the priest, aka a consultation for hypnosis, right? The priest gives you a ritual of cleaning to do, perhaps something else. And oftentimes I will invite my clients to take action to indicate their intention. There'll be a process of dream incubation, meaning establishment of the intention to have a dream for healing, insight, or transformation. The person will have that dream experience in the abaton, the place of sleep and dream within the Asclepian healing temple. And then they might be healed, they might have a healing later, it might be miraculous, it's really hard to tell. There's a variety of different healings that take place, and I have a paper on this on my website, cosmicdreamsanctuary.org/message, I believe, /writings. And so it runs through actually a compilation of the work by Edelson and Edelson about the healing temple in Epidaurus, which is one of the sources of knowledge we have about this. The next step in that is testimonial offering. So after you have a healing, you have to offer a testimony to the god of Asclepius. And that might come in the form of commissioning a sacred sculpture of Asclepius. That might be writing on the wall. And this is very, very similar to the experience of abductees sharing their testimony of contact with these transcendent realms. That's literally what happens after, as in the case of Sandra, right? She is sharing her testimony of healing after encountering some transcendent experience, right? And there are magical outcomes. They're literally documented magical outcomes that we find to be ridiculous from a Western perspective, modern perspective, but actually when you look at the testimony, it's very, very similar to a lot of the miraculous events that happen around the UFO encounters. So that is the theory. I want to talk a little bit about regression in practice. Finally, to just offer some thoughts. I do have my own experiences here. You can get to that at the case studies playlist in Cosmic Dream Sanctuary. It's super important to establish the right intention, right? So we saw in the case of Dr. Simon, his intention was to squeeze out historical facts, and that felt really like controlling. And it gets softer and softer and softer as we progress through the years. And I would say actually the best intention to hold is something vague where the higher self can project its own meaning to. And I offer the healing insight and transformation for the embodiment of peace, love, and unity consciousness here and now on earth as the ultimate intention for my work. It's important to, as we've seen, establish a sense of safety, invitation, and giving of permission so that the person feels in control. I'm going to talk a bit about the suggestions and inductions I use. You've experienced some of the suggestions I use, and I talked about them, but I'll talk about the induction just briefly in the next slide. I want to talk about non-leading inquiry just briefly because we've been going on for a long time. Non-leading inquiry involves a sense of not leading the hypnotee into what you want. So it's very easy to come to a conclusion, oh, you're dealing with aliens in a spaceship, right? Who knows, actually? That's the notion I have a lot of time, but somebody watching Sandra's testimony says, maybe she's in an underground base. And I was like, wow, maybe she is, right? So the way we do non-leading inquiry is to use algorithmic communication. So I'll go, what's happened next? What do you experience? Is there anything else that wants to happen? And just repeat those things. One of the best things to do is a deepening sense perception. So this is running through the senses. Do you see or perceive anything with your sight? Is it light or dark? Are there many or few things? And you can offer those suggestions as a range of possibility. And you just go through the senses. There's a picture that emerges, and you say, what happens next? If you run into problems, you can always ask the client. You don't have to make stuff up. You can call things forward, like tell me what happens next, or go to the next significant event, right? And then there are integration considerations, right? That I think are the more important than anything is the capacity to integrate these and to establish a suggestion around that. We are getting to some of the last slides. I know this has been a long presentation. So I just want to talk about the image of the scary door. The image of the scary door. It is some image I often use in consultations. I say, yep, you're right to feel a little nervous about these experiences because you are going to be different afterwards. And even though these experiences aren't scary, you might feel like going through a scary door. For me, it's the door in the basement of my childhood home, right? So I invite you in, and oftentimes it's like this door is the portal to a journey to the unknown that you have already intuited. It leads to healing, insight, and transformation. And then oftentimes I invite a ritualized affirmative and affirmation of their decision to go through that door. I'm like, are you willing to go through this door? And I say that in the consultation, and they'll often go, yes, I am. I want this. And then from there, it's fine. Anything after that is fine. If they're not willing to go through this scary door, then it's not the right time, I would say. And in the consultation, oftentimes I will work with suggestions. Your subconscious is wise, will only present that which you can reasonably integrate. You have already had an intuition of what happens and its implications, right? It takes energy to hold back that experience. And integration often relies on personal development, often psychic in nature, rather than physical memory. So those are suggestions I throw out in terms of the consultation to really invite a sense of exploration. Here's the basic script that I work with in any hypnosis experience, and that is to set the intention, is to establish trance through relaxation through the body. I invoke the higher self. We go through a process of grounding, clearing, energizing, protecting, connecting, and harmonizing. Then we have a journey. So this is the dreamlike experience. It's the imaginal portal. You express the intention, you observe the response, and you integrate the experience. Then there's a closing where there's a final experience. So that's algorithmic communication. Is there anything else that wants to happen? Keep doing that until they say, no, I'm done. You express gratitude for the experience. You invite the perfect integration. You invite commitment to action. So this is the testimonial offering in the case of the Asclepian rites. And then you shift the attention back to the waking consciousness. So thank you for being with the lots of words. And I just want to take a few moments to breathe with you, knowing that we are connected, safe, and at peace. Right? Let's try just to breathe together and to set conditions where any sort of sense of missing time that we might have had in the past feels very safe to come back into the consciousness. And you can do that. We're not going into missing time experience now. You can simply do this work by being present in whatever way is meaningful to you with the sound of my voice as I offer some suggestions. You might even find it to be enjoyable to relax your attention, knowing that you are relaxing and present with your breath, knowing that everything's totally fine, right? I'm going to offer some suggestions, and you can just let them sink in as deeply as you want them to, right? The suggestion here is that missing time may not actually hold any scary events, or it may hold events that are both pleasurable and painful, both expressive of the victimizer and victim role. They may deal with transcendent realms that are not physical. That whatever you might experience in those memories, those flashbacks, or anything you might be considering, or that intuition, whatever you're experiencing is being presented to your consciousness because your whole self believes you are capable of integrating that intuition. Knowing that perhaps those experiences of missing time or the whatever intuition that is active within you may deal in a realm outside of space-time, know that you can commit to being open to integrating those things and that the perfect time will come up. And if you like that idea, if you are open to the notion of integrating some forgotten aspects of yourself, I invite you just simply to say, yes, I'm willing to integrate those. I'm willing to do the work of developing my own emotional and psychic resiliency to receive those. And that may take the form of a commitment to action. And you may commit to doing some reading about the subjects. You may even commit to engaging in a practice of meditation. You may even commit to a practice of active forgiveness, an embodiment of unity consciousness. Just take a few moments to commit to whatever is most meaningful to you here and now in order to integrate any forgotten or missing time experiences or any intuition that is presenting itself. Yes, 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 yes. Thank you. So welcome back, come back, come back. Come back to the body, fully here and present. That was just a really brief experience of receiving some suggestions. Be at peace, Know that you're here on this beautiful blue planet, that you are held by Gaia, who loves you. If you find this group valuable, so we're at the end of the presentation, thank you for being here. But if you found this valuable, please consider donating. You can do that at cosmicdreamsanctuary.org/donate. I want to promote the Dreamwell app. This is where you can get to meditations and dream experiences. This is a really good place to start engaging. If you are interested in missing time, start by meditating and start by recording your dreams. This will increase your capacity to relate to the transcendent realms. And this is one of the best ways to do that. I have group sessions and services like tonight. There's another one on Sunday morning. Since I've just had a beautiful, beautiful baby, it is kind of irregular, so please do check cosmicdreamsanctuary.org/groups for the schedule. I offer one-on-one sessions if this was interesting to you. I offer them in a variety of modalities. All of my work is offered by a sliding scale donation, which means if cash is an issue, we can just talk about it. And I do work for little cash, and sometimes people donate a lot more, so it works out. All of this work begins with a free and no obligation consultation. To schedule that, you can go to cosmicdreamsanctuary.org/sessions. And finally, I'll invite you to join us for discussion on Zoom. I know it is much later than expected, so I will see if anyone's there and say hello. Once again, thank you for being here. Thank you for studying with me the foundations of regression hypnosis. I think this is immensely important for us to get right as we establish our collective understanding. And I would imagine and hope that we can relate to one another like these circles in this flower of life diagram, overlapping, just like the many contrary historical facts that exist in this world overlap to form beautiful patterns that are revealed here in this flower of life. Let this be an image that inspires us to accept one another's understanding of their own experiences. May this communication be of benefit, and thank you for being here.